Family Guy is a series that I have watched more times than I can count from beginning to end. I usually watch Family Guy before I go to bed, and I can firmly say I've watched the series at least 16 times. In the time that I've watched Family Guy, I have come to find episodes that I will specifically love no matter how many times I watch it, and they will always be near and dear to my heart. As a Family Guy expert, I'm going to be going through my personal top 20 favorite Family Guy episodes. Before we begin, I need to make it clear that this is my personal list, and you might not agree with every entry. A few of the episodes on here I consider underrated, and I want to give them the credit they deserve. But first, if you have ideas of things you would like me to cover in the future, please consider joining my Discord. And if you would like to ask me questions directly, please consider checking out my Twitch. Both of these will be in the description and in a pinned comment down below. Finally, if you're looking to watch Family Guy episodes that haven't aired in your country, I suggest you take a look at our sponsor, NordVPN. Just kidding, I'm not sponsored by anyone. Let's begin. Number 20, Viewer Mail. Viewer Mail is a really fun classic episode of Family Guy that was made because of fans that had sent in episode suggestions of things they would like to see in Family Guy. Viewer Mail goes through 3 different segments in a single episode. The first one being Peter getting a magic beer bottle that allows him to summon a genie, which eventually devolves into Peter wishing that he had no bones. The second part of the episode being the Griffins getting toxic waste dumped on them, and they develop superpowers, and the third section being a kid's version of Family Guy, which I believe parodies things that we have seen done before with spin-offs such as A Pup Named Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones Kids. Also, a really fun fact worth sharing about this episode is that this is the first Family Guy episode to have no cutaway gags. I would assume a big reason behind this is that with each of the segments only being about 7 minutes, there really wasn't much room to fill out the time with cutaway gags, but that's just my own interpretation. Now, talking about the highlights of the episode, in the first segment where Peter loses his bones, I really like the gag where Peter gets his own theme music.
Your second wish?
Oh, I got just the thing. I wish I had my own theme music.
Done!
I don't hear anything.
Get up, try it out.
Sweet!
I feel like this is one of the more wholesome jokes that has been lost in a lot of modern Family Guy episodes, but later the music comes back to bite him, as Peter makes somebody on a bus angry after he is threatened and he wishes that he has no bones. A really interesting fact about this though, is that the person who threatened Peter was actually a cameo from the professional wrestler Bill Goldberg. Here, take a look.
Hey, buddy, want to turn that stuff down?
Oh, come on, pal. That's classic traveling music, eh? Try to enjoy it. Riding on a bus, sitting next to bums, there's an open seat. Hope that isn't pee.
Yeah, well, I'm sick of hearing it.
Look, I'm sorry, buddy. I can't turn it off.
Well, then, I'm gonna break every bone in your body.
I wish I had no bones.
Done!
That ought to show you. Oh, no. I got a fart, but I don't know which way to lean.
Finally, after Peter loses his bones, he feels like he is a burden on his family, and he drains himself down the bathtub, leading to him trying to make it in Hollywood. But it doesn't work out, because he misses his family, and we get a grotesque but wholesome scene, where the Griffin family donates their bones in order to get Peter to be mobile again.
Or,
Peter, where do you think all those bones came from?
surprise! My God, you mean it's your bones that are inside me?
Well, mostly. We picked up a drifter to fill in the torso.
Well, like I always say, a family of freaks is better than no family at all.
Let's go home. You know what's really weird? This was covered by my HMO.
Next, moving on to the best segment of this episode, we get to see where Peter and the Griffin family get superpowers after they get toxic waste dumped on them. This part of the episode holds up extremely well in retrospect because of how it turned the superhero genre on its head, long before shows and movies like The Boys and Kick-Ass came into popularity. One of my favorite jokes from this part of the episode was when Peter and Brian do their usual nonsensical banter about how the Count is a vampire, but he is never shown sucking on somebody's blood.
Hey, is the Count a vampire?
What's that?
Well, he's got those big fangs. Have they ever shown him doing somebody in and then feeding on him?
You're asking if they've ever done a Sesame Street in which the Count kills somebody
and then sucks their blood for sustenance.
Yeah.
No, they've never done that.
I really love these dumb moments of banter between Peter and Brian. I've really missed in the early seasons when Brian was the voice of reason, Family Guy, and I wish they would bring this style of comedy back instead of what is currently known as D-Bag Brian. Anyways, the Griffins get superpowers, but they don't use them for good. Instead, they wreak havoc on the town and eventually threaten the townsfolk of Quahog before Adam West decides he needs superpowers on his own to stop them, and he rolls in radiation, leading to him getting lymphoma, which makes the Griffins feel bad enough that they stop wreaking havoc on the town and instead try to use their powers to nurse Mayor West back into health.
Oh God! Please help me!
You remember that time you called me Chris Gristle?
I think so.
Well, burn for it!
That's it. We have to fight fire with fire. If nuclear refuse gave them superpowers, it could do the same for me. Citizens, I'm off to the toxic waste dump.
Mayor West, you have lymphoma.
Oh my.
Next, we move into the weakest part of the episode, and that's when they do the Family Guy Kids section of the story. Honestly, I'm not too big of a fan of this part of the episode, as I feel like the first two segments before are just a lot funnier. Anyways, the plot of this episode is supposed to take place in the past, where Lois is the new girl in school, and all the boys have a crush on her. So, they try to impress her by going into a scary house. Quagmire and Peter break into their own groups, but eventually Mort scares them out and wins Lois over with his smarts, and when that happens, we get to see an alternative version of Peter and Quagmire's life, where they swore off women and decided to focus on their wealth.
He got us again.
Yeah, this whole thing just shows that women are nothing but trouble.
You said it. Let's you and me swear off him for good.
And how?
I say, Quagmire, it seems to me we've each made another $500 million.
Good thing we swore off women so we wouldn't be distracted and unable to accumulate this vast amount of wealth.
Yes. Hey, you watch the ticker. I'm gonna go microwave a bagel and have sex with it.
Butter's in the fridge.
Overall, I really do like this episode, but I feel like the segments should have been switched around. I think it should have started off with the superhero segment, as that is the strongest part of the episode, followed by the Griffin kids because that is the weakest part of the episode, and ending strong with Peter losing his bones, but maybe that's just me. But with that being said, we're moving on to the next entry on our list, number 19. And Mission Impossible. This episode is the first time Stewie's rival and eventual half-brother Bertram is introduced. This episode's premise is pretty simple. After seeing Lois's sister Carol give birth to her baby boy, who is never seen or mentioned again after this episode, the two of them decide that they want to have another baby. This, of course, makes Stewie jealous. Now, while Stewie is jealous, this leads to one of my favorite Brian and Stewie jokes, where Brian catches Stewie putting on lipstick in the mirror and kissing Peter's shirt to insinuate that he is cheating on Lois.
Well, look at you there. Oh, you're a filthy girl, aren't you? Yes, you're looking for a bad time, that's what you're after. Oh, you're a dirty flirt. You want it bad, you don't care who you get it from because you have no self-respect, and that gets you off, doesn't it? Oh.
Stewie! Bad boy, that's Mommy's makeup. Oh, and you got it all over your father's favorite shirt. Now go to your room.
Wow, the evidence is really piling up.
Make any joke you want, you know I look good.
Stewie, however, is caught by Lois, and his plan doesn't work out multiple times, leading the Stewie to shrink himself down and try and kill Peter's sperm, so that even if him and Lois have sex, she won't get pregnant. Something I want to bring up here, though, is that I noticed that CGI was done really well back in the day, and it fit completely into the art style of the show. Examples I can think of CGI being well done are the ships in Futurama and Stewie's sperm destroyer. I don't know why a lot of modern CGI doesn't blend as seamlessly, as I'm not an animator, but I just thought it was worth pointing out. Eventually, during Stewie's onslaught, we see an alpha sperm. This alpha sperm has managed to survive unlike the others, and of course this sperm is revealed to be Bertram. After Stewie and Bertram duke it out in battle, Stewie ends up coming out as the winner, but the two of them bond over their mutual hatred of Lois. After Stewie and Bertram bond, Stewie is open to the idea of having a brother, and after he escapes Peter's body, just in time, Lois comes to the conclusion that she doesn't need another baby because Stewie is already so needy. Peter is frustrated by this, so he goes into the bathroom to take care of himself, which enrages Stewie, as he thought that he had killed Bertram. But Bertram is smarter than Stewie had thought, as he managed to escape, leading to Stewie to realize that Bertram is actually a really big threat. This plot thread pays off very well, as eventually Bertram is born when Peter donates sperm to a lesbian couple, and Bertram truly actually turns out to be the threat that Stewie thought he was, as he almost destroyed the universe and Stewie has to kill him. Overall, I really like this episode because I like seeing Stewie act more like how a lot of kids do with jealousy when their parents are trying to have another baby, and I really appreciate how this plot thread pays off in the future. Now we're moving on to number 18, All About Alana. This is our most recent entry on this list, but it is with good reason. I really love this episode because it really felt like modern Family Guy going back much closer to its roots of older Family Guy. In this episode, we start off with a scene from the future showing Alana and Peter's wedding. What follows after this is us seeing how the episode got to this point. We are shown that Alana is one of Lois's piano recital students, which is nice to see because we haven't seen Lois teach piano in a really long time. Lois ends up feeling bad for Alana because she is talented, but she has no money, so Lois offers for Alana to stay with the Griffins so that she could get back on her feet. While Alana is staying at the Griffin's house, Lois is initially happy at first because Alana was a really huge help, but Alana had ulterior motives. She slowly ends up trying to take over Lois's life, and she wins the family over to like her even more than Lois. Alana even goes as far as attempting to seduce Peter, but he doesn't have any interest in her, so he ends up having her cook for him instead. This is actually really consistent in Peter's character because he almost even fell for Bonnie when she started cooking for him as well. But after Alana does this, Lois confesses to Brian that she's starting to worry about Alana, and when Alana tries to win Brian over, he confronts Alana briefly before she wins him over too. Even if it's dismissed later on in the episode, I really loved how protective Brian got of Lois in this scene.
Well, I worry Lois might be feeling a little displaced since you've been doing so much around the house lately.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I would never want to make her feel uncomfortable. Hey, maybe we should discuss this while I brush your fur.
Okay, I see what you're doing. This kind of stuff may have worked with the kids, but I kind of look out for Lois in a way that they don't. And believe me, Alana, I can get pretty mean if I want to.
I also really enjoyed the Loving You musical Brian and Alana did. Lois ends up seeing Brian and Alana sing 19 musical numbers together, and at this point Lois realized that she had to take matters into her own hands. Lois started being passive-aggressive towards Alana, and she decided to pay her out so that she could leave the next day. Alana decided though to take the money and have a hit put out on Lois so that she could take her place in the Griffin family. Before Lois goes missing, we're shown that Alana cut out all the pictures of Lois, replacing it with her face instead. Also, Alana even dyed her hair to look like Lois's, but she claims it was because she was such a huge Kathy Griffin fan. Lois ends up being captured by Alana's hitman, and she is thrown off the side of the road. Alana also left a note saying that Lois ran off to become a lesbian. What follows during this scene is a really heartwarming scene where Peter mourns Lois, saying that she is irreplaceable, but of course this cuts away immediately to him in a church marrying Alana. Lois ends up falling through the church and she stops the marriage. What follows is Joe arresting Alana as the song Jumper by Third Eyed Blind plays.
You're under arrest, Miss Fitzgerald. Come on, you're coming with me. This is probably like my favorite arrest.
I'm not gonna lie though, this is one of my favorite endings to a Family Guy episode we have ever had. A huge part of it is just that I really love this song, and Joe is one of my favorite Family Guy characters, so anytime he gets a moment to be genuinely happy, I'm always happy as well. Overall, this episode really felt like a saving grace and a breath of fresh air in Family Guy. It really feels like the jokes revolve around the plot like in early seasons, and of course it has a classical music number. Overall, this episode really has something magical about it that really feels like something reminiscent of old Family Guy. I really feel like this episode reassured my faith that I had been feeling since around season 17, that Family Guy was starting to get back on track and find its roots as to what worked so well in the early seasons. On top of that, Elizabeth Gillies, who played Jade in Victorious, just does an amazing job as Alana, and I would love to see her voice more characters across the series. With that being said, we're moving on to number 17, Saturated Fat Guy. Ah yes, this is one of the only Family Guy episodes on this list that leans towards being mean-spirited, but it's one of my favorite guilty pleasure episodes. This episode revolves around Lois and Peter after Lois reads a book called Food Kills. After Lois reads this book, she changes the family's diet to be more healthy, but Peter is having none of it. Peter eventually cracks over Lois's insistence on healthy eating, and as somebody who has struggled with my weight before, I can understand what Peter is going through here. Cravings are hard and it's really difficult to go cold turkey, but Lois has only done this out of love, as we see later in the episode, because Lois wants Peter to live a healthier life and to live a longer life. Of course, Peter can't see this as he overreacts to the healthy food being brought into the house, and his cravings get the best of him as he goes to a convenience store to purge on unhealthy food in the middle of the night. After Peter ends up buying his binge, Cleveland everyone smells it through the parking lot, and he gives Peter $10 for one of his sandwiches that consists of peanut butter cups, Doritos, sausages, a Capri egg, grilled between white bread. A fun fact about this sandwich is that a YouTuber named Binging with Babish actually made the sandwich to try it, and he said it was disgusting.
Oh yeah, peanut butter cup, Dorito, sausage, car, panini. And let's crack a Cadbury egg over the whole thing. Just gonna use my spare glove compartment underwear as a napkin. I can't believe Randy Quaid gets to eat like this every day.
But personally, I'm not willing to try it for myself, so you're gonna have to take his word for it. Later in the episode, Peter ends up buying a food truck, which he uses to make extremely unhealthy food. And clearly he is eating the food himself, as he ends up gaining a lot of weight. Joe even makes a comment about this, saying that his elbows are starting to pucker. Also, there is a scene where Chris buys Peter's cereal, which is nothing more than a bowl of M&Ms and Dr. Pepper. Oh, and let me tell you, this joke works great in real life, because one time my mom, my sister, and I were talking about which cereals we like the most, and my mom said Lucky Charms, my sister said Honey Bunches of Oats, and I remembered this episode and I smugly said a bowl of M&Ms and Dr. Pepper, which caused my mom to gag. Remember when I said I've seen this show like 16 times? Well, let me tell you, it's pretty clear because I can basically quote every line in the show. P.S. I just want to make this clear, I've never actually had that before. Now, the side plot of this episode basically revolves around Meg entering a roller derby team, but the B plot isn't nearly as funny as the A plot, so we're just going to be sticking to the A plot. Now, a little over halfway through the episode, Family Guy does one of its modern day sins that I absolutely can't stand, which knocks a lot of points off the episode. They basically do two sins in one joke, where a customer buys food, and it's just a time waster followed by the characters telling us the joke without any subtlety or nuance.
That'll be $16.
$16? That's expensive.
Yes, sir. Everything's very expensive because you're paying for it on an iPad. Now, if you'll just select a gratuity, options are 60%, 90%, and 200%.
I guess 60%?
Honestly, this leads for the joke to fall flat, but that's the one and only time they do it in this episode, so it barely scrapes by with an unacceptably lazy pass from me. Now, finally, we get to what is the climax of the episode, where Peter has eaten himself to the point where he can't even get out of his food truck. While Peter is struggling to get out of his truck, a Bing car drives by, and he misses it, and I love the joke that the Bing car is a much cheaper, barely getting by version of the Google car. The joke here isn't subtle, but it lands extremely well. This joke also throws me back to my childhood, as everybody on my street was really excited when the Google Maps car went through our town. Finally, after Peter is unable to get out of the food truck, he has to be cut out by the fire department and hoisted on a horse harness. Peter tells Lois that she must be happy because she was right, but she makes it clear that she didn't want this to happen, and that she wants Peter to be around as long as she is around, which I really like because it emphasizes her unconditional love for Peter. After Peter is let out of the food truck, he is sprayed down by a fire hose as the Bing truck swings back around through the neighborhood, and the episode ends with a voiceover from Morgan Freeman laughing at Peter. And although this episode is mean-spirited, I can't help but get a few cheap laughs of Peter's refusal to change his ways and live a better, healthier life. All I can say is, please don't judge me for liking this episode. Moving on! Number 16, Road to the Multiverse. This is Seth MacFarlane's personal favorite episode of Family Guy. You can really tell this episode has a lot of passion behind it. This episode starts off with one of my favorite Family Guy jokes my sister and I used to quote in real life. It's the joke where Stewie wins a fair competition by showing off a genetically altered pig. My sister and I used to always quote the way the pig said, "Oink." We would turn to each other and say this whenever we saw somebody who was completely yoked out beyond the point where it felt natural, so this joke always stuck with me. Stewie reveals to Brian that the pig actually came from a futuristic version of Quahog where Christianity never existed and set back humanity into the Dark Ages, causing technology to progress by about 1,000 years into the future. In the future, they have pills that instantly gets rid of viruses such as AIDS, and Meg is incredibly attractive in this timeline. However, they state that she is still considered ugly, and although we don't see it, I could only imagine what Lois would look like in this version of Quahog. After Brian sees the future without any of the art that Christianity had inspired, he asks Stewie to take him to more multiverses, but this leads to a problem where the two of them have no idea how to get back home. We end up seeing different universes with different art styles, such as one where Family Guy is the Flintstones, one where Japan had beaten the United States in World War II, and a universe where every person has two heads. In the two heads universe, one is happy and the other is sad, but while Brian and Stewie teleport to another universe, they are concaved in ice, and Stewie had to motivate Brian to wag his tail in order to be able to get him free, to be able to touch the time switch remote in order to hop to another universe. The two of them end up going to a universe where everybody has to poop at the same time, and what follows is one of the most iconic Family Guy scenes, where everybody is drawn in a Disney art style. In interviews, Seth MacFarlane has gone on record saying that this was completely made in-house, and I can't help but point out how beautiful the animation is. Honestly, I also can't help but wonder how the executives at Disney feel about these segments now that they own Fox. However, they make a reference towards Walt Disney being anti-Semitic, as all the characters in the Disney universe all work together to attack Mark Goldman for being Jewish.
Brian, we could spend the rest of our lives here. It's perfect.
Sounds good to me. Doesn't seem to be a thing wrong with this place.
Hello, everybody.
Oh yeah, I forgot. This is a Disney universe. Oh, but look how shiny my buttons are here.
Just push the...
Yeah, okay, I'll push the thing.
Also, after this, we'll get a scene where Brian and Stewie go to a Robot Chicken universe, which is always done in good spirit as they poke fun at the show because Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin, has no problem with the Family Guy staff poking fun at the show. We have seen this done before, like in the multiple times Robot Chicken was made fun of in the Family Guy Star Wars episodes. Also, before the Robot Chicken universe scene ends, we get to see Stewie, who is voiced by Seth MacFarlane, joke about how their show was on a major network for 30 seconds.
How's it feel to be on a major network for 30 seconds?
You!
Bye!
Then we get to see a universe where Nixon won the election without Frank Sinatra's influence, leading to a quahog and what I can assume is the entire United States being annihilated after the Cuban Missile Crisis leading to World War III. Then Brian and Stewie move to a low-resolution blocky universe with poor animation and annoying sounds before they swiftly get out of the situation. Then the two of them go to a universe with all fire hydrants, which Brian loves, before switching to a universe with all men, which Stewie loves. Then we get to see a glimpse of what Family Guy would look like in live action, as Brian and Stewie go to a universe where everybody is a normal person before they get out of there as quickly as possible. I haven't really brought this up before, but I think that Charlie Sheen would make an amazing live-action Quagmire. I know I'm jumping a lot from subject to subject, but I can see why this is Seth MacFarlane's favorite episode. The pace of the jokes are quick and snappy. No joke overstays its welcome. There are no time wasters, and the jumps from multiverse to multiverse work really well in the context of the climax of the episode. Anyways, Brian and Stewie end up going to a universe where everything is a political cartoon, before they switch to another universe where there is a guy who gives compliments, and what follows is them going to another universe where it turns out to be a ruse, and there is just a universe meant to trick people into being a universe with the compliments guy. I just really love how this episode keeps you on your toes, and you just have no idea what you're gonna get moving from scene to scene. Finally, Brian and Stewie end up in a universe where dogs have the same rights as humans, and humans have the same rights as dogs. Brian seems to really like this universe, and even breaks Stewie's universe hopping device. However, Stewie isn't as enthusiastic about it, and what ends up happening is Stewie gets himself into a life-threatening situation after he bites a dog version of Peter. Brian ends up having to team up with an alternative version of Stewie as a puppy in the dog universe, and while they are trying to break Stewie out of the pound, they come across a human version of Brian. After Puppy Stewie and Brian escape with Stewie, the human version of Brian ends up jumping into the portal with them as well. However, human Brian ends up being hit by a car, and a lot of people didn't realize this, but this is actually foreshadowing for Brian's eventual death later in the series.
Goodbye, Stewie. Goodbye, Brian. Maybe our paths will cross again someday.
Ah, look at him go. Free in a world of his own kind, where he can finally reach the full potential. Oh my God, he got hit by a car!
Brian, look out!
No, Brian!
Oh my God! Brian! Brian, can you hear me?
Holy crap, what the hell happened?
That guy sucked.
Human Brian and Dog Brian are two halves of the same whole, and it's really sad to see that the two of them didn't cross paths in the future. When making this list, I initially had this episode lower, but as I went along with the writing, I ended up realizing why Seth MacFarlane loves this episode so much. This episode paved the way into the multiverse genre that Disney has oversaturated. Also, this episode practically has no cutaways, as all the jokes taking place revolve around the setting of the universes they are in. Overall, this is a great episode, and even if it isn't my favorite, it is completely worthy of the praise it deserves. Number 15. 15. PTV. Who doesn't love this classic Family Guy episode? This is one of the few Family Guy episodes that pokes fun at censorship, and it revels in its not safe for work commentary on how it is destroying the creative freedoms we have all come to know and love. Along with that, its influence can be felt to this very day. This is an episode that was way ahead of its time, and I'm glad to be able to share it / talk about it with you guys. This episode starts off with a hilarious bit from Osama bin Laden, where he is much funnier and more charismatic than he was in the real world before Stewie puts an end to his charades. He ends up attacking Osama bin Laden and his terrorists before escaping with a segment that parodies Back to the Future, ending with a Simpsons skit. I really like how this ties into a Simpsons couch gag, but the episode moves on to Peter rolling out the red carpet for the Emmys. Lois is upset about this because clearly Peter has forgotten that Meg had a play happening later that night. After an argument from Peter and Lois, some sexual tension is underlined as Quagmire overhears it and passes out from how aroused he is, which leads to a hilarious scene where even though he is passed out, Quagmire can't help but say giggity.
Now, are you gonna go to Meg's play or not?
Yes!
You like eating red carpet, tough guy?
Yes!
Say you like eating red carpet!
I like eating red carpet!
Giggity.
This scene cuts over to the Griffin family watching Meg's play, and Brian thinks that it's so bad, he punches Stewie just to get out of it, and I couldn't help but crack up no matter how many times I saw this scene, because it comes out of left field and it's just so unwarranted. Peter ends up trying to take Brian's lead to get out of Meg's play because he wants to see the Emmys, but Lois doesn't buy it, and the following scene cuts to Peter being upset about how he missed one of the most iconic scenes in TV history, which was David Price showing off his testicles. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a parody scene on Janet Jackson having the nip slip at the Super Bowl. These events lead to the FCC going overboard as they believe that 20 calls equals 20 billion offended Americans, which is actually pretty funny considering that the population is 7.7 billion, including the entire planet, not just the United States. After these events, TV becomes censored across the board, and fueled by the motivation of seeing Peter's favorite TV shows change for the worse, he makes his own network called PTV. Also, a fun fact is I actually used to have a channel called JTV on YouTube, which I just used to practice video editing and post some AMVs that I was interested in making at the time. I don't really plan on ever posting on that channel again, but if you ever want to check it out, there will be a link down in the description below. Peter ends up releasing a few classic episodes that are uncensored on his network, but my personal favorite joke is coming from the classic episode of The Waltons, where John Boy blatantly states that he is playing with himself.
Jim Bob. Good night, Mary Ellen. Good night, Pa.
Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, Pa. Good night, Ma. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, John Boy. Good night, John Boy. John Boy?
Damn it, can't a guy masturbate in this house?
Peter's network, PTV, ends up being a huge hit, which leads to Peter coming up with the idea that he needs to start releasing some original programming. These episodes include The Midnight Q, Cheeky Bastard, and who could forget The Side Boob Hour. On a side note, I've heard people debate for years if Quagmire should have gotten his own show instead of Cleveland, and I can't help but feel like The Midnight Q would have worked great as a time holder for Adult Swim shows. If you guys remember back in the day, Cartoon Network used to do these things they called wedgies, which included such classics as Mr. Bixby, Nacho Bear, and Big Baby. But I feel like The Midnight Q would have actually worked really well in this setting. But of course, I'm self-inserting as to what I would have liked, so let's get back to the episode. Eventually, the FCC goes overboard, and they start censoring the real world. Lois is hesitant at first, but after she is neglected of physical intimacy from Peter, she admits that she was wrong. This leads to Peter confronting the FCC directly. Peter gives a speech about how censorship is wrong, and it leads to multiple senators agreeing with Peter, which follows with the contraband being lifted. In today's world, with censorship taking over the internet and content creators afraid to say what they actually want to say out of fear of being algorithm friendly, I feel like this episode holds some relevancy in the modern landscape of the internet, even though the episode was talking about TV at the time. Number 14, Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows. This is really one of my favorite episodes of Family Guy, and I love the way how it handles loss and moving forward. This episode opens up with Brian on a date with a girl who doesn't understand him, and when he goes home after his date, he rants to Lois about his dating problems. One of the things you will notice about early Family Guy is that Brian would rather be alone than with a woman who doesn't understand him, but Lois points out the flaws in this logic, as a relationship is about compromise. This is an underlying part of Brian's character development, because later in the series we see him fall in love with a girl named Jillian, Jillian. Jillian doesn't understand everything Brian has to say, but even outside of his attraction to her, he still has a great deal of love for her to this very day. Anyways, back to the topic of the episode. After Brian and Lois's discussion about love, Lois suggests to Peter to try and take Brian out, which leads to him becoming more depressed as the laser rock show they go to ends up singing a song about how lonely it is to have no one. During the rock show, as soon as Brian looks around and sees couples happy together, he can't help but pull out his flask and start to drink, which isn't really played up for laughs, which I actually really appreciate, and it gives us a little bit of a dark insight into Brian's depression. As Brian is driving Peter and his friends home, he ends up being pulled over by Joe, leading to him being caught way over the limit and being arrested. After Brian gets arrested, we find out that he got a DUI, which he has to work off through community service. After this, we get a really funny cutaway where Stewie is poking fun at Brian, and Brian calls Stewie out about the time he gave him apple juice and said it was wine, and Stewie pretended to be drunk.
Look, you're not one to talk, all right? You remember that time I gave you apple juice and told you it was wine?
I think you are a special person.
Thanks.
Now come on. I'm being serious. I'm gonna be serious here for a second. Are you gonna listen to me? Are you gonna listen to me so I can tell you that I respect you?
Honestly, it really is dumb, relatable humor like this that I just loved about early seasons of Family Guy. Brian, after being served 100 hours of community service, is assigned to the Outreach for the Elderly program, which leads to him ending up taking care of an elderly woman named Pearl Burton. Pearl is a woman who has lived her life secluded from the outside world, and she is cruel to anyone who tries to get close to her. She even dusts Brian with a powder, saying that it's gonna burn like hell in 30 seconds, and after continuing their conversation, the effects of the powder kicks in. Also, fun fact, I double-checked for consistency, and Pearl was accurate because the powder almost immediately starts burning after 30 seconds. Now, this is one of the few Family Guy episodes where the B-plot is just as engaging as the A-plot. In the B-plot of this episode, Peter grew a beard, and what ends up happening is that an endangered bird ends up nesting in Peter's beard, and he isn't happy about it. But later in the episode, the bird ends up laying eggs, which causes Peter to take on a more motherly role, as he enjoys taking care of them, but he does not want to let them go. And we will see this continue as we resume later to the A-plot. Brian ends up taking care of Pearl, making her tomato bisque. However, Pearl is unappreciative when it comes to Brian's efforts.
What is this, spit soup?
Tomato bisque.
What is this, snack soup?
Tomato bisque.
What is this, diarrhea soup?
Look, I'm not making you anything else, so just eat it, all right?
Later on, while Brian is changing a light bulb, Pearl decides to test Brian by acting like she had broke her hip, causing him to step on glass as he goes to save her, but she was just using it as a way to express her hatred towards him. Brian ends up being so angry about this interaction that he tells her to drop dead, and after he leaves her house, we get a touching insight into Pearl's character. It turns out that Pearl used to be a star, but after she pursued something that she was passionate about, her fans turned on her, leading to her never wanting to show her face again. After Brian sees Pearl's tragic backstory on TV, he stops her from offing herself, and he tells her that he's going to visit her the next day despite the fact that he isn't scheduled to see her. Brian ends up falling for Pearl, and despite the age gap, I really like how genuinely sweet Brian is towards her. This is a huge contrast as to how we would see Brian treat elderly women later in the seasons, like how we saw him cheat on Rita. Brian ends up convincing Pearl that there is still so much in the world left to see, and we even get a musical number expressing this. This is one of my favorite musical numbers we have ever seen in Family Guy, and it's much more tasteful than the one we would see later in the uncensored version of the episode P-Tarded. Unfortunately though, after Pearl finally decided to go outside, she ended up being hit by a car, which once again is foreshadowing for Brian's eventual death. Moving back to the B-plot, Peter is loving the experience of having to take care of the endangered birds, but when it's time for them to leave the nest, he doesn't want to let them go. We resume back to Brian and Pearl as Pearl is on her deathbed, and Brian shows up with a VR set to show her a life that they could have had together. Also, this scene cuts brilliantly back and forth between Peter letting the birds go, as Brian lets Pearl go as she passes away.
Goodbye, kids.
Goodbye, Pearl.
I really have to say, the A-plot of Brian and Pearl contrasts perfectly with the B-plot of Peter giving up the endangered birds. This is absolutely one of the most emotional endings to a Family Guy episode ever made. You know, this one really hits hard for me, because my grandmother loved my grandpa more than anything else in the world, and I really wish there was technology as advanced as Family Guy's interpretation of VR, so that she could have seen what life would have been like if my grandpa didn't pass away before her. Overall, I really love how this episode handles the A and B plots of Brian having to move on from somebody who was perfect for him, along with Peter having to let go of the birds that he had taken care of. The contrast between life and death is something that I feel like is glanced over when most people talk about the best Family Guy episodes, and I'm really glad that I had an opportunity to talk about this episode with you guys. Anyways, that's enough self-inserting. So we're moving on to the next entry on our list, number 13. Patriot Games. This is more than likely my brother's favorite episode of Family Guy because he is such a huge Patriots fan and a huge Tom Brady fan. This episode starts off with one of the most iconic skits of the series, where Brian makes a wager that Carol Channing would lose to Mike Tyson. In the B plot of this episode, after Mike Tyson loses to Carol Channing, Stewie ends up claiming the bet that Brian had wagered against him for $50. Brian makes the bold mistake of trying to get away with not paying Stewie the money he owes him, so Stewie proceeds to beat him up, followed by Brian trying to get out of paying him again, causing him to beat him up once again, followed by him shooting him in both his knees and setting him on fire. Stewie, after doing this, feels bad about what he had done to Brian. So, Brian gives him the money that he owes him, and feeling bad about the whole situation, Stewie tells Brian that he owes him one free beating. I'm not gonna lie, you know the skit is hilarious because I was laughing reading this out loud. This, however, though, sums up most of the B plot, and the A plot is much more interesting as Peter is embarrassed of the life he has lived after high school, so he pretends to be a big shot by being a cowboy astronaut. This works out initially, however, when Peter meets his former high school star, Tom Brady, he accidentally lets it slip out that he works for a brewery. After this, Tom ends up recruiting Peter to join the New England Patriots. Peter, almost immediately after joining the team, starts causing problems on the team, but he actually is really solid at football as a center, leading him to get a lot of leeway that other players wouldn't normally get. Peter keeps pushing his luck with Tom Brady, and Tom Brady eventually grows to hate him, while Peter is striving in his success. Peter is doing so well that he even gets a car commercial. Peter even ends up showing up late to a football game, leading to one of the funniest skits of all time, where Peter drives onto the football field, interrupting the game.
Where the hell is Griffin? It's almost time for kickoff.
Well, I guess we have to start without him.
What do you think, eh? I got this for doing that car dealership ad. All right, enough messing around, huh? Let's play this game. Let's play some football.
Tom Brady really isn't happy about this, but Peter ends up scoring a touchdown, giving Tom faith in him again, only for that faith to be betrayed by Peter showboating with the famous Family Guy Shapoopy song. Something that really might go over a lot of people's heads is that when Peter is showboating during the Shapoopy musical, each flag that is thrown during the musical is actually a 5-yard penalty. After this, Tom Brady tells Peter that he's off the team, and he is sent over to the England Silly Nannies. Peter ends up realizing that the England Silly Nannies are terrible, and I'm assuming they play rugby and not football, and Peter, out of frustration, ends up challenging the New England Patriots to a football game. The England Silly Nannies end up running away, but Peter runs the ball anyways, earning the respect of Tom Brady. After this, we get a well-earned and satisfying scene where Brian pushes Stewie into a bus to get payback for him shooting him in both his knees and setting him on fire, which I couldn't help but love seeing the first time I saw this. Overall, this episode is absolutely hilarious, but we're gonna move on to number 12, Lethal Weapons. This is an unforgettable episode from the early seasons of Family Guy. This episode starts off with the Griffins and the Swansons spending a day together at the lake before the leaves start changing color from summer to fall. However, as they are hanging out by the lake, they see the leaves change color in real time from summer to fall, and as soon as this happened, the citizens from New York invade Quahog to start watching the leaves change. What follows is Peter being angry about the overpopulation in Quahog, so this leads to him to rebel against the Leafers. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Lois begins taking jiu-jitsu classes after being suggested to take them by Bonnie. It turns out Lois is a natural, as she had always had a fighting spirit inside of her. Lois is a character that has always had a fighting spirit, and we'd even see this later in season 9 episode Baby You Knock Me Out, where she overcomes great odds against Deborah Jackson in a fight. Back to the episode though. Lois quickly climbs the ranks through her jiu-jitsu class. Lois is initially shown as being a white belt, but this changes as the episode goes along with her being a black belt, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Peter and his friends are not enthusiastic about the Leafers, and after the overpopulation in Koha gets out of hand, Peter ends up putting Lois in a position where she has to fight on his behalf. This situation emerges when Peter pretends to be a man-eating tree, leading to a Leafer from New York to pull him out of the tree and start fighting with him. Lois initially tries to break up the fight, and she is assaulted by the man, so she ends up fighting for herself using her jiu-jitsu lessons, which ends up impressing Peter. Chris praises Lois's actions, but this ends up having some serious consequences for the family as the whole family begins to grow more violent. Peter even goes as far as trying to make Lois a sideshow attraction. When Lois ends up confronting her coach about this, he basically tells her that if she doesn't want to go through with his training, she might as well get used to people walking all over her. This ends up leading to a montage where we get to see Lois rise from a white belt to a red belt. We even get a scene where Lois is sticking up for herself when another lady and her son try to take Stewie's spot in a swing, so Lois decides to put her in her place by scaring them away. Meg and Chris end up getting into a trivial sibling argument, and Lois forces them to behave, and then Peter gets the bright idea of taking Lois to the drunken clam with him. After a few barmaids end up trying to fight Peter, when he runs his mouth, Lois sticks up for Peter, but fighting on his behalf, which leads to Lois feeling empowered.
Excuse me, New Yorker. I think you're in my seat and I had sex with your mother last night.
Peter, are you crazy?
What did you say? Oh, about the seat or about my plowing your father's wife? Hey.
What the hell are you doing?
Excuse me, is your refrigerator running? Because if it is, it probably runs like you. Very homosexually. What?
Oh, you wanna dance?
Jet suck, Yankee suck, Nick suck.
After this, Lois and her master get into a battle, and what ends up following up is one of the most disturbing scenes in all of Family Guy. In this scene, Peter is casually chilling and watching TV, but Lois walks into the room and forces Peter to take his pants off. What follows after this is Peter being mentally disturbed as he sits alone shaking on the family dinner table as he eats Stewie's graham crackers. When Brian walks into the kitchen, he takes note of why Peter looks the way he does, and Peter claims that the previous night, Lois was the man. To be honest, I try not to think about what Peter meant by that, so I just try to take note of the fact that Peter looked traumatized after what had happened to him. So, as Peter is eating Stewie's graham crackers, Stewie decides to strike Peter with a baseball bat. After Lois blames herself, Stewie is taken into therapy, where he expresses how he sees relationships and what he considers a healthy home. In this scene, we get a subtle nod to Stewie's sexuality as the therapist points out that Stewie has gender confusion. After Stewie attacks the therapist, the Griffins are asks if Stewie has a history of aggression, and the conclusion he comes to is that Stewie is getting this type of behavior from home. The Griffins try to confront their aggressive tendencies, leading to Brian giving them pills causing a placebo effect, and after he reveals that the connection the Griffins were having is fake, it breaks into an all-out brawl. After the Griffin family settle down feeling as though they had gotten out all the problems they were having with each other, Peter expresses that the FCC needs to control what is okay and not okay to be allowed on TV. Overall, this episode isn't very wholesome, and it lacks a lot of the heart of previous entries on this list. But that doesn't mean it isn't downright hilarious. With that being said, we're moving to the next entry on our list. Number 11. Long John Peter. Long John Peter is absolutely one of my favorite episodes of Family Guy. This is an episode that perfectly flows from Peter being a pirate to Chris having a B-plot where he has a girlfriend. This episode starts off with Peter being upset about being overcharged at the vet, but after seeing the parrot as a citizen, he becomes inspired to steal the parrot and he becomes a pirate. While Peter is at the veterinarian office, Chris ends up falling for a girl named Anna. This episode is an example of love at first sight, and Chris can't help but want to see the veterinarian again. Peter ends up showing up to the drunken clam with a parrot, and his friends encourage him to become a pirate, which Peter takes to heart. Chris, later in the following scene, tries to get Brian sick so that they can have an excuse to go to the veterinarian's office, and he does so by showing Brian Meg's breast covered by her bra, causing him to vomit. Not gonna lie, this scene is pretty messed up, but I can't help but get a cheap laugh out of it. After this, Peter bursts into the room as he has claimed he is no longer Peter, but he is Long John Peter. Brian questions the crew Peter has assembled, but he says that they are members from his old fisherman days, which if you guys remember, it is Peter's not so memorable time as a fisherman. Although that being said, they should have included Santos and Pasquale in this. Lois is not happy about Peter's crew, and she wants them out of the house. In this scene, what follows is Peter and his crew of pirates raiding Mort's pharmacy, and Peter's crew takes on the biggest task they have ever taken on. This task is stealing Shelly's tobacco, sugarcane, and spices. Peter's crew and Shelly engage in battle, and it has become one of the most iconic battles of the series, but eventually Peter's crew was able to overwhelm Shelly. Shelly ends up falling into a river, and if you guys have ever watched any of my missing characters videos, you would know that Shelly has been missing and never shown again after this episode. However, Shelly is more than likely alive, as he didn't make an appearance in the episode Coma Guy. After this scene, we get into the main plot of the episode, which shows that Peter's parrot took damage on the battlefield, and the Griffins go to see if the parrot made it, but unfortunately he didn't pull through their battle. Finally, we get into the main plot of the episode, where Chris gets the opportunity to talk to the girl he was interested in, and that girl's name was Anna. A fun fact about Anna is that in all the promotional material that she was shown in, she is shown to have brown hair, but in the actual episode, she is shown to have blonde hair. Even in the Hulu promotional art, if you go to the episode, you will see that she has brown hair. Anyways, Anna ends up asking Chris out on a date, and he says yes, and what follows is the two of them having a healthy relationship, along with the two of them being overall sweet to one another. However though, this doesn't last long, as Peter gives Chris advice that if he wants to get anywhere with Anna, he needs to start treating her poorly. Chris takes his father's advice to heart, and what follows is Anna dumping Chris after he treated her like crap. Peter ends up feeling bad about what he's done to Chris, so he tries to make it up to him by setting Chris up on a few dates. The dates Chris goes on holds no weight to the series, but one of the girls Chris ends up seeing is an old classmate named Barbara. Chris and Barbara's date ends up going terribly, as she leaves in the middle of it because Peter is too intrusive. Here, take a look.
Chris, this is Barbara, the girl from your class you used to have a crush on. Now you kids enjoy yourselves and I'll create some atmosphere. This is a favorite by Men at Work. Get a bird in your head up and up. Get a bird up and up. Look at me with a brand new Hyundai.
Chris ends up going into a serious depression because he misses Anna more than anything else in the world. So Chris decides that the best way to get Anna back is to physically hurt Brian, leading to one of my favorite background scenes in any episode of Family Guy ever made. After this, Anna decides to give Chris one more chance, and Chris is happy about this. I honestly can't help but feel a little sad that Anna wasn't shown again after this episode. I can't help but feel like Anna had the same potential as Jeff Fishman from American Dad, but I also feel the same way about Jillian. I really like the way she fit into the story, and it truly is a shame that she is one of those characters that it seems like we're never going to see returned again. I also really liked how Shelly fit into this episode, and I just wish that there were more Family Guy episodes that withheld this level of quality. But overall, I was really glad that I got to make this list. I know this is only part 1, but I really look forward to releasing part 2. And I can't wait to show you guys my top 10 favorite Family Guy episodes of all time. That being said, if you really like this video, please feel free to give it a like. And if you like Family Guy informative videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. I typically post Family Guy shorts daily, so I typically have a plethora of things to cover. And like I said in the beginning of the video, if you would really like to support me, please consider joining my Discord or following my Twitch, where you can ask me questions while I'm live. With that being said, I appreciate each and every single one of you. Thank you guys all so much for 3,000 subscribers. You guys all take care. Have a good one.